Hello, in this video we're going to configure Gulp with the less CSS preprocessor. This video is going to build on the last video where we set up ESLint in Gulp. So we're going to go to the GitHub repo at github.com/bjanderson/jspm-angular-core, and we're going to copy that repo. So we do git clone in the repo. And that's going to create a directory named JSPM Angular Core. We're going to cd into that. And then that'll put us on the master branch. And to get the code from the ESLint video, we'll say git checkout ESLint setup. And then we will create a new branch and we'll call it less setup. Alright, then we run npm start to install npm and JSPM dependencies. Then we're going to install some new dependencies. So we'll run npm install save dev. Let me move this up a little. We're going to get gulp inject, gulp less, and then we're going to get less plugin auto prefix and less plugin clean CSS. And once those install, we want to open Sublime Text, so we'll do subl dot. And then we're going to create a new file in our Gulp tasks folder, and we're going to call it less.js. And here's what our less.js file looks like. So we are going to require gulp, gulp inject, gulp less, and the less plugins for auto prefix and CSS clean. And we're going to set up auto prefix to give us browser prefixes for the last two versions. And we're going to set up CSS clean to just do an advanced compression. So that the auto prefixer gives us browser prefixes on our CSS, and then clean CSS just compresses the output from the less processor. Then we're going to create a task named less, and we're going to use client/style.less as our source, and we only need to include that file because we're going to import all of our other less files into there. So we're going to pipe that to inject, and this is where we import all the other files. We're going to grab any less files from our project, and we're going to make sure to ignore the JSPM packages folder so that we don't import third-party less files. And we are not going to read them because that will make this slower. All it does is try to read the file before it imports it, so we don't need that. And we're going to make it only look in the client directory. Then it's going to look for a start tag and an end tag, and it's going to inject all of our less imports between there, and it's just going to import all the files that end in .less in our client directory. Once it gets all that done, then it's going to run the less processor on the style.less, and it'll run that output through the auto prefix plugin and then through the clean CSS plugin. And finally, when it's all done, it'll put a style.css file back into our client directory. Now we can go to our serve.js file and configure our less task in our serve task. So we still want to reload the browser when CSS changes, but we're only going to have one CSS file that we are looking at. So we're going to change this to say client/style.css. So whenever that CSS file changes, we want to reload the page. But now we need to add a watch for our less preprocessor. So we're going to do gulp watch, and we're going to look at all of our less files, and we'll look in our client directory specifically. And then whenever any of those change, we're going to run our less task. So the less task will run whenever less files change, and then that will change the style.css file automatically, and that will trigger the browser to reload. So we don't have to put a reload on our less watch. And then also we want to add our less task down here to nodemon, so that we run our less compiler when we run gulp. So we'll add less. Okay, now we can add a style.less file to our client directory. And there's a trick that we need to implement here, kind of a hack. So since we are, let's go to main module, since we are using the system loader to import our CSS files, it does not guarantee the order that it will import those files in. And that means that more likely than not, our CSS files will be overwritten by third-party CSS files when we import them. So to get around that, we need to add a more specific CSS selector than what the third-party CSS files have. And that just means basically we need to add an ID tag to our HTML tag in index.html. So if we go to index.html and we add an ID tag in our HTML tag at the top, we can use that to select all of our components in our HTML file, and it'll be more specific than any third-party CSS. So it doesn't matter what order the CSS files get loaded in, this will be a more specific selector. So then in style.less, we will just say pound my app, and we'll put all of our CSS inside of this my app selector, which is this from this ID right here, so that all of our CSS will be applied no matter what third-party libraries or what order the third-party libraries are loaded in. And then we're just going to go to our style CSS. We're going to take this CSS that was in there and put it in style.less. And then we need to add our imports. So we're going to put our start and end tags into style.less. So we need that one and that one. So now all of our less files in our project will be imported in between these two tags, and they will be within the my app selector, so they will also have the specific selector applied to them. Now we can go to, we'll just add another less file in here. So we'll go to home, add home.less. We'll say body, and we'll give it a color, and we'll just give it a dark blue. So now we should be able to run gulp. And that should create our style.css for us. It opened the page. Let's shrink this down a bit. Okay. So you can see our background is applied, our color is applied, and if we look at style.css, you can see that both the background color and the color are inside of the my app body selector. So importing them in through style.less right here does put them into this more specific selector. Now if we go to home.less and we change the color, you can see that the browser does reload. So we're just running the less preprocessor whenever we change the less file, but then that triggers the change on the CSS file and that reloads the browser. And we can also change the color here, and it works. So that is adding the less CSS preprocessor to our Gulp configuration. I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, please like and subscribe and leave a comment below.